July 4th, 1946. A hill above Gdansk. A 22-year-old woman stands on the back of an open military truck with a rope around her neck. 16 days short of her 23rd birthday. 2 years earlier, she had been an ordinary farm cook from Danzig. Then, the SS handed her a uniform, walked her through the gates of Stutthof concentration camp, and taught her to decide which women lived and which ones walked to the gas chamber. Her name was Elisabeth Becker. And the most disturbing part of her story isn't how she died on that hill. It's how little it took to turn her into someone who belonged there. The cook from Danzig. To understand how she ended up on that truck, you have to go back 10 years and meet a girl who was nothing like a monster. Elisabeth Becker was born in 1923 in the free city of Danzig, a German-speaking pocket on the Baltic coast. And at 13, she did what nearly every girl around her did. She joined the League of German Girls, the female wing of the Hitler Youth. She marched, she sang, she absorbed the slogans, and then she grew up into something utterly unremarkable. A cook, an agricultural assistant, a young woman who worked with her hands. There was no cruelty on her record. There was no early warning sign a documentary could freeze on and say, "There." That's where it started. And that is exactly the problem. Because in the autumn of 1944, with the German army bleeding men into the Eastern Front, the Reich went looking for bodies to fill the jobs those men had left behind. Every German woman of working age was already registered with a local labor office, which meant the SS had a list, names, addresses, occupations, of exactly who was available. They didn't need volunteers anymore. They had a database. And one morning a clerk pulled Elisabeth Becker's file and handed her an assignment like it was any other posting. A 3-week course in cruelty. On September 5th, 1944, Becker arrived at Stutthof, the first Nazi camp built outside Germany's borders and the last one the Allies would liberate. She did not arrive as a killer. She arrived as a trainee, and the SS had a curriculum waiting for her. Earlier in the war, training female overseers, the Aufseherinnen, the female camp guards, had taken 6 weeks at Ravensbrück, with theory, supervision, and a probation period. By 1944, there was no time for any of that. New guards were trained on site, in about 3 weeks, by women who had barely finished their own training. And the lessons weren't really about ideology, because the girls arriving that autumn had spent their whole lives inside the Reich's machinery already. What was left was practical. They watched the older guards work. Then they stood beside them while it was done. Then they were expected to do it themselves. A survivor named Zofia Jakowska would later describe to a courtroom exactly how that conditioning was delivered. Not by ordering anyone to be cruel, but by moving the threshold a little further every single day until refusing felt stranger than obeying. By the time a new guard had been there a month, she'd crossed so many small lines that the large ones stopped registering as lines at all. The point was never to find women who were already cruel. It was to take ordinary ones and sand the empathy off them, deliberately, on a schedule. And the most chilling thing about that schedule is what it left behind. Decades later, another Stutthof guard asked whether she regretted the work, said only that her real mistake had been getting sent there at all, as if the camp were the crime, and her part in it just bad luck. The training didn't only change what these women did, it changed how they understood what they had done. It built the defense before the crime. The machine took Becker in raw. 3 weeks later, it sent her out finished, authorized to decide who worked and who didn't. And at Stutthof, where the gas chamber had been running since June, that distinction was the difference between living and dying. Inside Camp SK3. By October 1944, Elisabeth Becker was assigned to SK3, the women's section of Stutthof, and the abstract training became a daily job. The prisoners she guarded were overwhelmingly Jewish women, many of them just transferred from Auschwitz as the Red Army closed in. They arrived already half destroyed by the journey, and at Stutthof they found conditions that matched or beat whatever they had already survived. The crematorium ran day and night. The smell of it reached every barrack in the camp. Nobody who had been there more than a week could pretend not to know what selection meant. And selection was Becker's function. The prisoners were lined up, looked over, and sorted. Some toward labor, some toward the gas chamber. There was no medical exam involved, no training for it. You looked at a person, and you decided. Becker, the 21-year-old former cook, stood among the guards, who decided. She would later tell a court that she selected 30 women, though she insisted she had only been choosing them for work. Whether that was true, or a drowning person's last grasp at a defense, the routine itself is what should make your skin crawl. This was not a rampage, it was a shift. Day after day, the same procedure, the same indifference the 3-week course had been built to install. Inside a camp that would, across its 6 years, swallow up to 110,000 people and kill more than 60,000 of them. And while Becker did her job inside the wire, a second guard was building a very different reputation. A young woman named Jenny Wanda Barkman, whose cruelty the surviving prisoners would never forget, and whose name we will come back to in a courtroom. The Reich falls. The hunt begins. Then the machine that built her began to come apart. In mid-January 1945, with the Soviet Red Army closing on Stutthof, Becker did what tens of thousands of Germans were doing across the collapsing East. She ran. She slipped out of the camp and made her way home. And somewhere in that flight she contracted typhus, the same disease the camp had been breeding in its overcrowded barracks for months. So when the war ended, she wasn't hiding in triumph. She was lying sick in the city of her birth. It did her no good. The city she'd been born in no longer existed under the name she'd known. German Danzig had fallen to the Soviets, been emptied of its German population, and was being remade into the Polish city of Gdansk. And the new authorities weren't running a manhunt so much as reading a ledger. Camp records had been seized as the Allies swept west, and those records had names, ranks, and addresses. Becker's was among them. On April 13, 1945, before Germany had even formally surrendered, Polish police walked into her hometown and arrested a feverish 21-year-old former guard. Her entire career behind the wire had lasted roughly 130 days. Her trial and execution would take longer than that. The woman who had once decided other people's fates now had none of her own left to decide. 2 women in the dock. On April 25, 1946, the first Stutthof trial opened in Gdansk, and 13 defendants were marched into the dock. The commandant, the capos, and 6 female guards, Elisabeth Becker and Jenny Wanda Barkman among them. For 36 days, the court heard what the camp had done, and the 2 young women became a study in opposites. Barkman had volunteered for her post. Becker had been drafted into hers, and it showed in the dock. Barkman reportedly styled her hair for the proceedings, flirted with the Polish guards, and treated the courtroom like a stage, even as survivors testified that she had sent children to the gas chamber without a flicker of hesitation. Becker, by contrast, wept openly, retracted her confession, and begged for her life. One wore composure like armor. The other came apart in full view. It would be easy to make Barkman the star of this story, the cold, beautiful villain the internet loves. But that framing forgets the women she tortured, and it misses the harder truth sitting one chair over. Barkman is the version that lets you sleep, because her cruelty looks like something the rest of us could never share. Becker is the version that doesn't, because she went in an ordinary cook and came out having selected 30 women for death. Ordinary, terrified, guilty, and about to discover whether 36 days of testimony would buy her any mercy at all. 15 years, or the noose. Here is the part almost no one tells you. When the verdicts came down on May 31, 1946, the court sentenced Elisabeth Becker to death, and then, in the same breath, recommended that her sentence be commuted to 15 years. The judges had done the arithmetic. She had served barely 4 months, far less than the others, and the bench seemed to believe that warranted a measure of mercy. Think about what that recommendation cost. These were judges who had just spent 36 days listening to survivors describe selections, beatings, children sent to die. And at the end of it, they wrote, formally, in their own hand, that for this one defendant, 15 years was enough. For a few weeks, Becker was a woman who might actually live. She used the window to write letters from her cell, one after another. But the recommendation wasn't the final word. It traveled up to the desk of Bolesław Bierut, the president of the New Poland, in a country still counting 6 million dead. And Bierut said no. He let the death sentence stand. With one decision, a man who never set foot in that courtroom overruled the judges who had sat through all 36 days, and the 15-year reprieve evaporated. The trucks were already being prepared. What the photograph leaves out. So we end where we began, on the hill above Gdansk, July 4th, 1946, with the candy and the balloons and Elisabeth Becker on the back of a truck. This is the image the internet has kept. 11 figures on the tailboards, a noose for each, a crowd that came to cheer. But the photograph leaves things out. It doesn't tell you that the 200,000 spectators you'll see captioned online is almost certainly a myth. The war had gutted the city's population. The Polish press of the day estimated tens of thousands, and sober historians put it lower still, somewhere between a few thousand and 50,000. It doesn't tell you that the woman with the rope around her neck had been a cook 2 years earlier, drafted through a labor office, condemned, and then nearly spared. And it doesn't tell you what the drop actually was. These were not engineered gallows. The trucks simply reversed under the crossbeams. The nooses went on, and then the trucks drove forward and the tailboards pulled away. The machine that took an ordinary girl and built a guard out of her in 3 weeks needed one last product to call the job done, and the cameras were there to capture it. We have been consuming that final frame ever since. The system that produced Elisabeth Becker, the labor office, the youth group, the 3-week course, was dismantled in 1945. The blueprint was not. The least we can do is remember what the photograph actually shows.